Glenn, why don't you go ahead and start lay out the things that you've done for the Finish the Fight movie, the initiative that you got started.
Well, I can go back a little bit. I'm a Desert Storm veteran. So 35 years ago, is that right? 1990, 90, yeah, about almost 35 years ago.
I was told there'd be no math today, so I don't know why.
You were lied to. You were lied to.
Yeah. Well, and I had to do that in my head, and I've still got morning thing going on in my head. So 34 years ago, I was called up when my son was 4 months old. I was at my 4th wedding anniversary when I got the call, and went and fought. You know, we just did what we were told to do. As an Army guy, the one that raised my hand and swore to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States, that's what we did. And we went and did our job. And I was one of these guys for the longest time that thought, okay, I'm a soldier, I'm a veteran, my country loves me and cares about me. And oh my gosh, I've only one time in my life have I been that wrong before, and that's when it came to the pandemic. So I found out that this is not the country that I fought for in 2017. And we can go into that here in a little bit if you'd like to. Here's where the biggest mistake I think the government officials are making. We fought for this country, and I would fight for this country again. I would never put on a uniform for the government, though. And the government forgets there was a time 35 years ago now for me, 36, where I raised my hand and I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And what you're talking about right now is a government that is not even hiding its evil, if you will, its bias, its lust for power, lust for money. It's all out in the open, and it just blows my mind. They're not even secret about it anymore. If you can open your eyes, you see it every day. So we're here to expose some of that.
Yeah. I do think that we were talking a little bit earlier. The government, the federal government at least, had long ago exceeded its constitutional authority. I think that whether you're talking about all of the regulation that happens inside the United States, the authority that Congress has abdicated to the president to make war, to engage in warfare and foreign police actions, if you will, that's totally unconstitutional. And there's not a whole lot of debate about whether it's constitutional. There are people that'll debate that it's legal. People that'll say, well, the War Powers Act or what have you, the authorization from Congress for the president to execute the global war on terror. They'll say, well, that was legal. But I'm not personally all that. I'm not personally all that convinced that they're actually legal, because things that are offensive to the Constitution are invalid. Nate, why don't you go ahead and take it from here a little bit about your experience?
So one of the things that recently was adjudicated by the Supreme Court, which I think was a very, very important ruling, is the one on Chevron deference.
Absolutely.
It is completely, upended this notion that these federal agencies get to regulate and create law. They're not the legislators. But that's what's been going on, and that is a huge part of the problem. Now, Congress is not without their own issues, because they have the power of the purse, and yet they have not used it to stop a lot of this. We've got, in fact, one of the things I was very disappointed with, in this current Congress was when they basically decided to continue to fund Section 702 of FISA, which has allowed for unwarranted spying on American citizens. And I don't care what anybody says. This is not Nate Cain saying this. Is federal judges saying this. There was a federal ruling where they said that over 458,000 times Section 702 was illegally used to spy on American citizens. Now that's pretty crazy and pretty bold, because I was read onto that program at one point in time in my career. And I remember being concerned and going, wow, this is some pretty heavy duty surveillance capabilities. And I remember thinking, what if they abuse it? But I would never have thought of abusing it, because they made it very clear to us that if we did, we were looking at 10 years in prison because of deprivation of rights under color of law. And yet What have we seen? We've seen not a single person at the FBI go to jail for misusing the system. We've not seen any accountability whatsoever. And it's been used, like I said, and it's been used against people on the right and people on the left. That's something I think that's really important, because there should be, a broad scope of Americans that are, being, hey, what's going on here?
Isn't that traced clear back to the Patriot Act, though?
It is. Yeah, it is.
I remember when that act was passed, and I was just dumb enough to believe my country loved me. I'm like, okay, so yeah, okay, they need to do this to be able to find terrorism. That was such a load of junk. It was actually the way that they could take advantage of something I believe they caused, but we were told it wasn't. It was an act of terror, in order to spy on us.
Even if we were to go and steelman the government's argument, right, that the Patriot Act initially was intended to catch terrorists in the U.S., I don't think that there's any argument that it has greatly exceeded those constraints. So if you want to, not that we're particularly concerned with steelmanning the federal government's arguments, especially on a day like today when we're covering these kind of topics, but if you do want to say, okay, well, let's hope the government has the best interest of the American people. And 20 years ago or 25 years ago, when the Patriot Act was passed, it was more reasonable to think that. Then now today, it's very clear to most, maybe not most Americans, but to a plurality of Americans, that the federal government doesn't do things that it's particularly concerned with, that are particularly concerned with protecting the rights of the American people, or at least the bureaucracies aren't, right? So your FBI, your NSA, your bureaucracies that are charged under Homeland Security with protecting the American people and protecting the country. They're not so concerned with the rights of the Americans. But if you're going to steelman it and say, well, they intended to do the right thing, there's not much of an argument that it's been, that it's exceeded the limitations that the arguments they initially made.
Yeah. I think we're living in a world now where we are seeing an example of that law of unintended consequences. They pass these rules, they pass these laws, some act or whatever, and they think, oh, we're going to use it for good, but they don't think about, they don't do proper risk management on these laws, right? They don't go, okay, how could this be abused? And they really should. On any law that's created, they should absolutely consider, if the wrong person or the wrong administration got a hold of this, how could they misuse it against the American people? One of the things that changed in the world since 9/11 is we now have a politicized Department of Justice. That wasn't that way back then, and it is now. I mean, I can tell you firsthand, I was working there, and I absolutely saw at the FBI a very politicized, a very woke environment.
If we can get Travis to jump in here, how did you get involved with Glenn and Nate, and to what extent is your filmmaker status? What was the outcome you were looking for to start telling this story?
Yeah, that's a great question. Man, I just love making movies. But what ended up happening was through a mutual friend who was just a friend for a few days. Glenn knew her for 1 or 2 days. I knew her for 3 or 4 days at the time, which is the funny part. As I I go to this church in Georgia, and Shannon Weimer was someone who was interested in investing in a project that I'm working on. And she was like, hey, this is really great. I think timing for me is bad, but let's keep in touch. I think I can connect you with some people. And then literally the next day or two, she meets Glenn, and Glenn's like, I have a filmmaker that I want to make a music video. And I just don't think it's the right move right now. So she goes, I know a guy, so I don't know how you got connected with Shannon, but it was just a day or two after I had talked to her about a project and all the stuff that I'm working on. And I'm working on some really crazy things right now in the film industry that I think are really going to revolutionize things, wildly revolutionize the film industry.
Yeah, that was just an outside, a friend of a friend that she
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
So it's that circle of influence. It's a matter of networking, which is something I
Move the
really,
mic a little.
yeah, it was a matter of that networking is something that I do well. And so a friend of a friend introduced me to her, and she introduced me to you. And it was, and 2 weeks later, we're filming a music video.
Yeah, I mean, we talked. I wasn't really interested in making a music video because I'm like more of a feature film. You know, I would do episodic, but more of a feature film is kind of where my heart is. And but he's one of those rare cases where Glenn tells a story in his music. So I was like, okay, I actually want to do this project. Let's do it. So we had a great conversation. We dove into it. And to answer your question, which is what did I want out of it? Nothing really. I mean, initially it was just like, I believe in this guy. I think he's an undiscovered talent that needs to be discovered. His music is meaningful. It's great. He's got a solid band. But then after the music video, he goes, I think there's more here. And I was like, all right, what are you aiming at? And he goes, I think there's a movie here. I'm like, okay, now you're speaking my language. The music video turned out to be kind of a short movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's cool. You know, it's about a guy who goes to war and, you know, signs on the dotted line and then meets a battle buddy, and they go in to battle together, and the battle buddy ends up dying. And it's about, you know, coming home and dealing with that, right? How do you heal physically, emotionally, mentally, all that stuff. So it's just a very touching song, and I love the story. So when we started making the movie, I'm like, all right, what's the premise? He goes, I don't know. I'm like, well, if we're going to make a hour and 50-minute long feature film, we got to kind of know what it's
No
about.
script, just wing it. Let's go.
Yeah,
That's kind of what happened at the beginning. Yeah.
let's gladiator this thing where you come in with, you know, a few ideas, and then we just make a whole film out of it, which is really what ended up happening. And I think I recut the first half hour 6 times. And y'all, we made this in 90 days. Documentaries can take 10, 15 years.
Sure, yeah.
And some, of course, take, 12 to 18 months. We did this in 90 days, which might be a record. I don't know. But it went from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. And I didn't I didn't have the expectation of getting anything out of it. And I still don't know if I will or have. But I agree with the vast majority of things in the film. I think it's a powerful message that needs to be heard, and I think I'm just proud and glad that I was a part of it. I think more than anything.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.